Good evening, everyone. I'm Margot Basso, the Director of Community Relations at Santa Maria College, for those who haven't met me. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this evening on managing COVID-19 related anxiety. It couldn't be at a more relevant time. This evening, our college psychologists, Dr. Stephanie Wade and Dr. Kimberly Burrows, will be providing parents with strategies to help support your daughters' anxiety or manage anxiety in relation to COVID-19. We are recording this session. That's so that we can share it with people who have registered but are unable to attend. So please note that. If you have any questions at any time, please just pop them in the chat at the bottom or raise your hand, and Kimberly's going to answer those for us. And so I will hand you over to Steph starting first, or Kimberly, both of them. I'll hand you over to them and I'll just be quiet. So enjoy.
Thanks, Margot. We're all good and live? Yep. Bear with us, this is the first time that we've done an online webinar, so if there's any sort of technical issues, please bear with us, but I'm sure we'll be all right. Thanks for joining us on your Wednesday afternoon. As Margot said, this feels like a really relevant topic right now, and something that both Kim and I feel quite passionate about. We see a lot of anxiety in our profession and the girls at school, and so being able to have the opportunity to help your daughters is really great. So starting right from the start around what is anxiety. I guess, you know, at times like this in a global pandemic, it's really natural to feel stressed, worried, anxious. These feelings are really natural responses to any perceived threat or uncertainty. And actually, as humans, we're primed to feel fear in response to a threat. It's been really critical for our survival. You know, just imagine seeing a threat like a lion. Our bodies get primed to fight or run away. And that's been really critical for our survival, because you can imagine what happened if we didn't feel fear. It probably wouldn't work out so well. I guess it becomes unhelpful though when anxiety gets to a level that causes us distress, when the threat is actually no longer there and we're still feeling anxious, when there's a mismatch between the level of threat and the level of response, or when there's prolonged activation of our nervous systems, our stress response. I guess to help us understand a little bit about what anxiety looks like, because everyone responds quite differently, have a think around what you associate anxious symptoms. I kind of like to break it down into 3 categories. So the physical symptoms of anxiety, so you might notice breathing really fast and shallow, heart racing, butterflies in your stomach, feeling really flushed. You might notice changes in appetite. Thinking around thought expression. So if you're looking for anxiety in your daughters, are they constantly talking about their fears and worries? Are they catastrophizing the likelihood that bad things will happen? Are they needing a lot of reassurance, like always asking if things are going to be okay? You might also see some behavioural symptoms of anxiety. So it can come up like irritability and like oppositional behaviour. It might be, you might see a lot of self-doubt where you might not otherwise see it, and clingy behaviour, difficulties with sleep, and one that we do see quite often, particularly with COVID at the moment, is avoidance. So avoidance of normal activities out of fear. So avoidance of coming to school or sort of just going out. So before we get sort of straight into how COVID-19's affected anxiety and how we can help, Kim and I thought it would be a good idea just to explain a little bit around the 3 main ways that our mind and body scan for and detect threat and safety. So there's three main ways. The first is through our conscious perception. So that is like what we can see, what we can hear, those our 5 sort of senses. So if for instance, the house is on fire, the perception cues would be seeing the house is on fire, smelling the smoke, those sorts of things. Those senses come into our brain and cue our body to respond, feel fear and flee. The second way that our brains detect threat is through interoceptive cues, and these are internal cues. These are unconscious cues usually that come from your body, and then they come up to your brain to become conscious. So that might be, for instance, your body telling you when you're hungry and you become aware of that, and that's a cue to eat, or when you feel tired and your body letting you know that, and then that's a cue to sleep. When you need to go to the bathroom, those sorts of internal cues. So in the case of a house being on fire, the interoceptive cue might be that you're starting to feel really hot, and that's a sign of danger. Now, this third way that our mind and bodies detect danger and safety is what's called neuroception. And this one's really important, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this today because it's a bit different probably to what you might have heard before. So the neuroception is an unconscious system of detecting threat. So it bypasses the thinking brain, like our conscious brain, the cues that go in, and go straight into activating our body. So examples of neuroceptive cues might be facial expression or tone of voice, a lot of non-verbal cues that we are coming into our system that we're detecting, but not necessarily in our conscious awareness. One of I find the easiest ways to think about this is, imagine this scenario where your house is on fire, and your perception is that you can see the smoke, see the fire, hear that. You might feel your heart racing. That's our internal cues. Then imagine that the fireman arrives, and when the fireman arrives and he's like, okay, everyone, I need you to sit over there. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to get what we need to, and we're going to take care of this. And he's really calm. He's really regulated. How might you feel? Versus if the fireman comes in and is like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Your house is on fire. Do we have enough water? I don't know if we have enough water. I don't know. Maybe you should help. I don't know. How do you feel? How does your nervous system feel when the person that's meant to be calm and safety is actually quite anxious themselves? That's a really good example of our neuroception. So these unconscious cues that tell us, is there a threat? Which is like a really panicky fireman, or are things going to be okay? So we'll delve into more about this a bit later. So how does COVID-19 affect our anxiety? I'm just going to delete this quickly so you can see, but if you think about all the cues that we're getting to signal threat or danger, we are seeing that everywhere at the moment. Our environment is full of threatening cues, whether it's a sign saying keep your distance, or attention, or don't walk in here, have you got symptoms, to everyday environments where you're seeing people in masks or full PPE equipment, picking up your phone and saying, how many community cases of COVID there are, how many deaths there are, listing exposure sites, even going into the supermarket and seeing empty shelves. There is so many cues of threat at the moment for us in our environment. I'm also thinking, in terms of our neuroceptive cues, how many people are there's just a collective sense of increased anxiety at the moment, given all these threat cues. So even upregulated nervous systems, anxious nervous systems, kind of bouncing off each other, increase our general sense of anxiety. So it's sort of no wonder you'd be feeling anxious at a time like now. You might be thinking so far whoa, that is a lot of things that we're up against. But this is where Kim and I really help you think about, actually, there is some really good news. There are so many things that you can do to help your daughter. that aren't maybe as difficult as what you might think or as complex as you think. And really this actually provides an amazing opportunity for us to help our girls build resilient skills, be able to manage anxiety, manage challenges that we know are going to come up throughout their lives. So I think this is actually a really wonderful opportunity. So back to how to do that. So I'm going to talk through, I guess, two parts of how you can help. And the first part is sort of really encompassing the being with your daughter, and we're going to spend a lot more time unpacking and detailing what that looks like, because I think we all tend to jump to the doing, you want to jump in, you want to help, you want to problem solve. What do I do? What are some skills? What are some strategies? We will get to that, absolutely, but I really want to focus on the being with. So first, I guess, is even noticing, is your daughter feeling anxious? And that comes back to those physical, cognitive, and behavioural cues that we talked about, that I mentioned at the start. I think it's important to understand too that everyone responds to stressful events differently. You might find, some girls are actually they're actually feeling pretty okay. They're not stressed. They're not anxious about what's going on. You might find that your child is actually feeling anxious but not really showing any signs of it, like kind of masking, and we'll talk about that. It might be that they are feeling really anxious but displaying it in a way that you wouldn't expect. So if you're thinking you might see a lot of anxiety, it's them withdrawing, might be a sign. And it can be that they're feeling maybe anxious about something completely different to what you think they are. So being really mindful not to assume what they're feeling anxious about. Kim and I we've talked about how, when this all started, we thought there would be a lot of fear around getting sick. And actually what we often hear from our girls is potentially some worry about other people getting sick. But it might be more around like, how am I going to speak to my friends as much, or how am I going to do my schoolwork, or other areas around this that aren't necessarily just around the sickness. So if you identify that your daughter's feeling anxious, our second step is really around this self-checking and self-regulating. It is super important that you are the calm fireman. That age-old analogy of you need to look after yourself and put your own mask on first before you can help others really does apply here. Again, thinking about the fireman coming in to rescue, he needs to be calm. Coming in a panicked state is not going to help anyone. So the first thing that you can do is check in with yourself if you're going to approach your daughter, and check that you're regulated, that you're calm. So have a think about how you might naturally do this for yourself. How do you self-regulate? How do you keep yourself calm? Breathing is a really good way of calming our nervous systems. So you might find that you are someone that likes to take a few deep breaths. It might be that you know that you need to just sort of go outside and get a bit of fresh air if you're feeling really anxious. It might be that you know that you need a hug or some contact, listening to some, chill music for a bit, release some of the muscle tension. Or it could even be like for you, if you need to self-regulate, that you even visualize that really calm rescuer, that calm fireman in your mind to help bring you down to that calm level. So coming in to co-regulation, what we're calling co-regulating is, so self-regulating is regulating yourself, and co-regulating is using yourself to help regulate another. So it means using your calm nervous system to calm your daughter's nervous system. This is really, really key to de-escalating anxiety. And the good thing here too is that given how important co-regulation is, it also takes the pressure off you having to say the right thing, having the answers, having the, the perfect response. Often we'll hear, parents will be like, but I told her not to worry, or I told her to do this and she did, she's still really anxious. What do I do? So instead of thinking about what you need to do, just thinking around being with, it's really quite incredible how effective that can be. So how do you co-regulate? There's lots of information here that I'll go through. First is being quite physically close to them and embodying the calm, which we've already talked about. The next part is really attuning to and listening to your daughter. So really listening without interrupting. So if she's got lots to say, if she wants to tell you how she's feeling or what's going on or what her worries are, really listening, really tuning in, hearing what she has to say, not necessarily thinking about what you need to say back, just being with. Rarely can a response make anything better. So in that moment, trying to understand what she has to say and acknowledging that and reflecting that back to her to see if you've got that right. So, for instance, if your daughter's telling you lots of things about her worries, you listen, let her sort of talk that out. Then you might really want to acknowledge. So, oh gosh, I can see how terrifying that must be, or I can see how upset you are. Often being able to check in with them about how they're feeling, like if they haven't actually labeled their emotions, you can check in with them. So notice you've been pacing a lot. Like, how are you feeling right now? Like, I wonder if you're feeling a bit anxious. We know with our teens especially that going in and telling them how they are, you're probably likely to get met with a bit of resistance. They're going in like, you're anxious, aren't you? Or you're really sad. They might be like, well, no, I'm not actually. So really putting our stuff aside and kind of being open and curious to hearing from them. Validating, again, really important for validating their feelings. So validating and acknowledging their feelings doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree with the reason or think that it's in proportion. So I think of, like a younger child who is really upset that they have a pink pencil case instead of a purple pencil case and have completely lost the plot, lots of crying, really like overwhelmed, big feelings. We don't want to come in and say, like, it's just the pencil case. It's not going to calm them down. We want to acknowledge their feelings. So, I can see how upset you are. Even though in the back of your mind, you might be, it's just pink versus purple. I hope that makes sense. So as the slide says, the goal really is to understand how she feels and connects to her. Ask really open-ended questions. Be really curious. You don't have to solve her problems. The other point to note here around listening and attuning and understanding your daughter is you can use a lot of empathy. So using your own experience, but making sure that you're still keeping it about her. So if you want to share like, I know what it's like when I feel anxious, that's really hard. But what's it like for you? Like when you feel anxious, what's that like? So really kind of putting it, again, making it more about them rather than, I find anxiety really hard too. In fact, there was this time and I felt really anxious and I did this and I did that, and you kind of backtrack and it becomes about your experience. Again, you want to just be with your girl. I also thought it would be helpful to mention that, you know, why is it when it seems like you're giving some really good advice or really good practical advice and they just can't hear it? And I even think back to, like, let's say you come home from work, you're really stressed, you've had a bad day, something's happened, and you go to speak to your partner and they're like, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? Like, how do you feel? Like, sometimes that just makes you more frustrated. So what we know is that when emotion is really high, so when this emotional part of the brain is really activated, neurologically, like biologically, we lose connection to that, to the smart part of the brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex. That's the thinking part of the brain that gives us logic and reason, and can plan and problem solve and do all those really human things. So we actually lose like connection between those two parts of the brain when we're feeling a lot. So saying calm down to someone, or saying, you know, giving any practical advice when someone's really feeling big emotions, they're literally not hearing you. That part of the brain is offline. So it's not that they're not trying, it's not that they don't want to, it's that they actually can't. We also know that that front part of the brain, the thinking brain, develops like as you get older. So you'll notice, you think of your younger children, toddlers, babies, are really, the way they respond to the environment is very much from their emotional brain and from reflexes. They haven't yet developed the ability to really think things through. So why can't we have chocolate for dinner? We can't really reason. That thinking brain is still developing, those connections are still wiring. So we need to connect with them and soothe them at a different level. And that's where those neuroceptive cues are really, really important. So a toddler who might not be able to understand why chocolate is not okay to have all the time for every single meal for 3 months, and is really upset, you want to use your body, those neuroceptive, emotional brain neuroceptive cues, rather than explaining. So we've been through the identifying anxiety, the really self-checking, self-regulating, then co-regulating with your child, really listening and attuning and validating their emotions. So only then, once you've been through all of those, then we do the responding, then we do the problem solving, then we do the scaffolding. So what might that look like? I might just pause quickly because we're going okay for time. Kim, I just wondered if there's anything else that we might have missed so far, if you wanted to chime in or highlight anything else before I move on to the responding and scaffolding, or are we all good?
I'm happy.
Okay.
If everyone's on board so far, if everyone's still with us.
Cool. All
Please
right.
shout out with questions, guys. I'm manning the chat screen here. So if
any questions, please. It's hard. I don't see faces or questions, so it's hard to see if we're still with everyone. Okay. Okay, so what can the doing part. So in the moment, responding to anxious thoughts, anxious behavior, and more generally, what we can do to help reduce threat cues and improve cues of safety. One thing that we know really arcs up anxiety is unpredictability and uncertainty, and the nature of a global pandemic is completely uncertain and unpredictable. We don't know who's going to get sick when. We don't know how many cases there are. We have to constantly be on alert. So there's a real sense of, are we going to be, previously it was, are we going to be in lockdown now? Is it, what level of restrictions? There's so much uncertainty. So in terms of, a way that you can provide some predictability and provide some certainty for your child is through routine. think about some real basics in your routine that can be applied really no matter what the circumstances. So whether there's quarantine, whether in quarantine at school or not, things like bedtime and wake up times, keeping that at the same time, having a morning routine like getting up, getting showered, dressed, breakfast before you go to school. If you're at home because you've been required to isolate or because you're unwell and quarantining, keep that same morning routine. So sometimes I think probably, especially when the pandemic first started, we were like, great, like, you know, get out of bed at whatever time and stay in your pajamas all day and do whatever. For our children, having that same routine can be really containing and provide that sense of certainty. So even if they're not going to school, still getting up at the same time, still getting dressed into like out of their pajamas, still having breakfast, and then maybe structuring the day similar to how you would at school. So having, you know, chunks of time that they might try and do some study or an activity and have breaks like recess and lunch. Bedtime routines can also be really, really helpful. And I'm sure you'll sort of been all over this too, when you, particularly for the young children. So what helps calm and prime sleep? Having just a ritual that you do all the time, winding down, having a cup of tea, whatever it might be. Family rituals are also a really nice thing to include as part of the routine. So it might be that every Friday or Saturday you have a movie night together, or, you know, Taco Tuesday or whatever it might be. For our children, even knowing like, oh yeah, like Tuesday's coming up, we're having this for dinner, can be really containing. You can also be really creative in maintaining other valued areas of life that might be a little bit more difficult given the restrictions. So if they're unable to go to a sporting activity, can you do some movement at home during that time? If they're, you know, usually catch up with their friends after school on a Friday or on, you know, on the weekend, can you schedule a FaceTime, schedule that social interaction in? We also know that if there's some particular worries, for instance, a lot of our children are worried about the, you know, grandparents getting unwell or not being able to see, you know, friends or family members who are interstate or are overseas. You might also want to include some kind of ritual into your week, which gives them that, again, that sense of certainty. So it might be every weekend we FaceTime grandma. And so during the week when your daughter's feeling really anxious, oh, I wonder how she's going, like, oh, I know that I'm going to see her on Saturday. It can be really, really calming. The other important thing about routines, and we'll talk about this later, is it helps prevent avoidance behaviours. So avoidance like staying in bed all day, which we know can increase low mood, anxiety symptoms too. So ensuring that you're getting up, getting dressed and doing things and keeping something in the day can really help prevent getting stuck in those avoidance behaviours. Okay.
Can I chime in, Steph?
Yeah.
Since we have a little bit of time to play with. We've had a few really awesome questions in the chat that I would kind of love to put to you and to the group. One of them, which I think is really pertinent for our boarding families, is how do you co-regulate when you've got a kid at distance and you can't physically be with them? It's a really good question.
Absolutely. Do you want me to start and then you chime in with anything too?
Yeah, no, go for it.
So remembering that co-regulation is not just our conscious senses. So if you, for instance, are on the phone, you could be on the phone maybe with your daughter in boarding, the sound of a really calm voice can be really regulating. So that's another, you know, you might not be able to have facial expressions, although FaceTime can help. It's even just hearing a calm voice can be one way. And prompting, you can do activities together. So you lose that physical connection, but it might be like, okay, let's take three deep breaths together on the phone. I'm going to count. I want to hear you, I want to hear you like breathing in 1, 2, 3. Okay, I want to hear you sigh. That would probably be an example. Anything else from you, Kim?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think you can kind of use the phone to your advantage there, right? Like, well, I can't hear you breathing, so I need to be able to hear it. You've got to force that through the microphone in the phone so that I can hear you breathing as well. But yeah, that calm voice for sure. And I think sometimes that's hard as a parent, because when you hear your distressed kid and then you're getting really distressed because you don't want your kid to be distressed. So that's that self-regulation as well. Like, I'm really upset that my daughter's upset and I'm a long way away and I'm feeling big pain, but I need to check myself so that I can be that calm voice on the other end of the phone and come down with her, I guess, as well.
Absolutely.
We had another really great question. Can I put it to you now, Steph? One of the, I'm assuming it's mum, Jody, is sort of dealing with a situation where she's got 2 daughters who are dealing with anxiety in really different ways. One using sarcasm and kind of some dark humor, and the other one who's more teary and is finding the humor is really distressing for her. So any suggestions on that front?
So when everyone's together?
Yeah, I guess it sounds like they're really not, they're bouncing off each other in a really negative way. So elder sister's dark humor in her way of dealing with this pandemic is causing more distress to little sis, I think it is, who's becoming more anxious and teary.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if that would be worth kind of opening up a conversation, having a bit of an open discussion with yourself and the 2 girls, I guess, depending on their age. Talking about regulation and how we all cope differently and how can we help each other. Like, I'd really enlist both of your daughters to help support each other and think about how do they regulate, and then what might they do to help their sisters too. So if I'm kind of doing okay and notice that maybe you need a prompt from mum that, okay, my other sister's feeling really quite teary, can I offer her a hug, or can I take my upregulated energy outside? So you might even need to redirect mum. So separating them a little bit, I don't know, but maybe worth a conversation.
So helping each with a bit of self-awareness, like how aware are each of these girls of their own coping styles?
Yes.
So maybe that's something we can help reflect for them. Like, okay, I can see when you're anxious, this is your response. And when you're anxious, this is your response. So they're really aware of that, because it is important that we're aware of our effect on other people as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's okay to be quite explicit about talking about regulation and how you calm. I think that's okay to have a really open conversation about that. I'm just thinking too about that first question around co-regulation. It also does come back to self-regulation. So the way your daughters learn how to self-regulate is through co-regulation. So if there's been a lot of times where you have co-regulated together, that is teaching your daughter how to self-regulate, and then she's more and more likely to be able to do that by herself without you there. So you don't need co-regulation to be okay. Like, we can all draw on our self-regulation, but it enhances it if you're there and co-regulating, for sure. And also is a really lovely skill to teach, so they can learn to self-regulate more by themselves.
Thanks, Steph.
Okay, back to the doing. And please, like, if any more come up, let us know. Thanks, Kim. So thinking around, like what I was saying before, our world is full of cues at the moment. So all the conscious and unconscious cues of threat and danger are like bombarding us. So how can we minimize those, at least, because some we can't. So limiting media exposure can be a good idea. We see how much the news is full of images, concerning topics, threat. Maybe you want to limit the amount of time that someone's spending on it. particularly if you notice your daughter's really quite obsessively checking social media or watching the news or always asking about stats, you might need to think about limiting that so it's not an ongoing cue. Same with limiting discussions around COVID. Remember to talk about fun things at the dinner table too. And yeah. The other thing is to be really mindful around information sharing. And this is a real balance, of course. So we don't want to keep our daughters in the dark. We want to be open about what's going on for yourself and for the world. So if we were like, oh no, everything's fine, then our daughters are still getting all those other threatening cues and know that something's not okay. But if you're just saying everything's fine, I guess it invites catastrophic thinking and worst case scenarios. So we want to have some level of openness about some of our concerns. But we also really want to be mindful that they don't take on all of those concerns, and particularly concerns that aren't theirs to carry. So for instance, like there's been a lot of hardship for so many of us throughout this pandemic. If you imagine, I don't know, maybe a scenario where dad's lost his job and mum's really worried about, income and like finding a place to live because you can't afford the place that you're renting. You might not necessarily want your daughter to know all the details, like, oh yeah, dad lost his job, mum's worried, we only have, we're only getting $500 a week and rent is $400 and we don't know how much we have left for. Like that level of detail is probably too distressing and burdening for them. But keeping them completely closed off can also be really unsettling. Like, oh, all of a sudden we're moving house, I don't know why. So being able to say something like, dad's not working there anymore, which is really sad, but he's applying for some new jobs. There's a great one coming up. And don't worry, like we're always going to have a place to live and we've always got enough food, those sorts of reassuring statements. You can also ask them if they have any particular concerns. Again, kind of being curious about, is there anything that you're worried about? Are you anxious about? And you'll be surprised what comes up. Alrighty, so talking about thoughts and behaviour now. So we might often find that our worries, particularly when we're in that really heightened emotional state, again, we've lost connection with the thinking brain, lots of overestimating how likely a bad scenario is going to happen, overestimating how bad it will be if it did happen. And often we underestimate our ability to cope if that thing does happen. So helping your daughter put things into perspective once you've helped them calm down. You might ask them like, oh, what would you, I wonder if there's another way of thinking about that, or what would you say to a friend in that situation? Just cueing them to put things into perspective. If they're really struggling to come up with those answers, feel free to prompt, of course, like give them some suggestions. Like, oh, okay, I think that might be pretty unlikely, to reassure them to some extent. So helping put those catastrophic thoughts into perspective. When it comes to anxious behaviour, that's where we're talking about, we can see a lot of avoidance of particular places or activities. And we might see the opposite, where there is a lot of reassurance seeking and a lot of over control. So I'll go through those quickly. So being mindful not to, collude too much, to enable too much avoidance. Sometimes I think it's easy for us to allow it because we don't like to see our daughters or anyone in distress. So imagine, I'm going to pick going to school. If your daughter's becoming really anxious about going to school and we say, that's fine, like if you're not, don't feel up to it, just stay home. Okay, as a couple of once-offs maybe, or talking to them about what's going on for them. But you can imagine if they are really anxious to going about school and you just say that's fine, stay home, no worries, their anxiety will go down. So you'll probably feel more relieved, but then it comes to tomorrow and the fear is still there, the same thing is still there. So if, again, we allow them to avoid because the distress is sort of intolerable, they end up just feeling anxious, and often actually the fear can grow, and they don't get a chance to learn that actually they can sit through those difficult feelings, they can cope with this. So if you look at the graph on the right, we ideally want to help them enter a feared situation like going to school, learn that, okay, their anxiety might go up a little bit higher than what we'd like it to be, but then they have the ability to cope, and then their anxiety goes down, and then they have that sense of empowered, like, oh, I went to school and actually it was okay and I coped and I got through it. We really build their confidence to be able to cope with difficult things. So just being mindful around that avoidance and really gently helping them move, face those fears. So you might want to do that in quite a graded way. So again, if school's really, really hard, like a 10 out of 10 hard, then perhaps it will be going to first period. Like, what if we just go to first period and their anxiety gets to like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 in intensity, and then they come home and they're like, okay, I managed that, okay. All right, maybe tomorrow I can get through to lunch. So see if you can scaffold them. And they get that sense of mastery, like, okay, yeah, I can do this. The other trap we can fall into is giving a lot of reassurance. We want them to feel safe. And so it can be easy, I guess, or tempting to just be like, everything will be okay. We need to be really mindful of, I guess, not being unrealistic or promising anything that might not happen. So if you were to say, like, as an extreme, like, oh, you definitely won't get sick, it's okay. We know then that in the event that happens, there's going to be a real mistrust around, oh, I don't know if mum or dad's reassurance here is actually trustworthy. And so it activates that sense of uncertainty for them. Also, if you continue to reassure, again, you're not letting them sit with that comfortably uncomfortable level of anxiety and learning that they can manage this and find the skills to cope by themselves or with your help. The other thing I might quickly mention here around reassurance is coming back to acknowledging and validating our daughter's feelings. And we don't always have to reframe things in a positive way. So we don't always have to look for the silver lining. So sometimes I think, the way that we have been modeled to think about difficult events, it might be like, oh yeah, this really bad thing happened, but at least some positive. I'm trying to think of an example. Kim, can you think of an example of a silver lining that might be?
Just that one we were talking about earlier today, where it's like, oh, I'm really upset, my eldest daughter is flunking out of school, and someone being like, oh, but at least your youngest is doing really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's that. Yep, that kind of thing, silver lining, which can actually feel really invalidating and lead to feeling misunderstood. So the other behavioural symptom of anxiety that we might see, and actually we have seen a lot of this, is a sense of over control. So when everything's uncertain, everything feels out of control, our tendency is to try to find things that are within our control and that we can hold on to. Trying to control things that really aren't within our control leads to a lot of difficulties, and trying to over control things to an extreme can also lead to some difficulties. So if you think one that I've seen a lot through this pandemic is trying to put more focus and control on eating and exercise behaviours, or like really detailed study plans, and so much obsession and preoccupation going into that that in itself becomes a sense of anxiety, or obsessively controlling their like hygiene and hand washing, going over the top with that can be really unhelpful. So given there's some acceptance here of a lot of things are outside of our control, and we're going to sit with that uncertainty and anxiety, you can also still help empower your child to take control of things that are available to them, to give them that sense of self-efficacy. So it might be like, as you can see in this infographic here, you can all right, so I want you to be in charge of turning the news off after 15 minutes. Can you do that for me? Yep, cool, Mum. All right, thanks. Do you want to take control of writing down a basic study routine? Like, I know you're feeling really uncertain about if you're going to get all of your school done. So how about we make just a bit of a plan to see where you're at? Things like that. We know that we can't control how long this crisis will last. We can't control how other people are going to respond. We can't control the government mandates, those sorts of things. So what can we focus on that is within our sphere? Again, I think I just really want to emphasize that learning these skills, learning self-regulation, co-regulating, connecting, building resiliency, opening, communication with your daughters. This is such a wonderful chance for us to practice these skills every day, because this pandemic is affecting us every day. So building these skills and helping your daughters with this generalizes to challenges that they're going to encounter throughout their entire life. So I think this is a really, really great opportunity for that. So I've sort of rambled through a whole lot of things. And Kim and I are really thinking, like, what would some of the really key messages be that we want you to take home from today's presentation? So firstly, really is, when it comes to anxiety and threat, help creating safe internal and internal environments. So when your child's world is on fire, being that calm fireman, even if the only thing you remember from this presentation is that image of the calm fireman, being calm is going to help rescuing. You don't have to have the right things to say. Second is really around that attuning, listening, openly listening, being curious, validating and acknowledging their feelings, even if you don't understand or you don't agree with them. Helping them feel understood is really settling. So again, keep in mind that your goal is not to get rid of the anxiety, it's not to get rid of all the threats, that's really unrealistic, but it's to help empower them to believe that she can cope when any challenge arises, and helping her with the skills to do that. We've got some, I'm not sure if we'll have this, I think these slides will become available, I'm not sure, but some further resources we can provide to give you a bit more information around this topic. Also, if you're noticing that a lot of these unhelpful ways of managing anxiety are showing up for your daughter, and it's becoming really intense, it's really significantly maybe affecting her ability to cope with everyday life, then do reach out for some more professional support. There's again some great websites, or contact us at Health Services or psychologists at Santa Maria, and we can give you some recommendations. And best of all, see your GP, who can is a really great starting point for getting more resources on board. Thanks, everyone. I wonder if we open it up to questions again, Kim.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, Steph. That was so much to cover in 50 minutes. You did amazing. I think really that key point of like, we're not trying to fix anxiety. We're trying to help our girls to be comfortable with like, yeah, it does feel gross to feel anxious, but you can do this. Questions, guys, bring it on.
I can't see the chat box, so just
Okay.
no.
I have it open. I'll let you know if we get anything. We'll give people a minute to type.
Yeah, or if anything I've said sort of hasn't made sense.
So we've had Lani say that she wants to work on her listening and acknowledging and validating. I usually go straight to fixing. Totally. I think like that is our natural instinct as parents and people who care, even for your friends. You straight away want to jump to problem solving. And Steph's example of like when you get home after a hard day and your husband's like, oh, well, did you try this? Did you do that? Did you do this? And sometimes all it makes you feel is a bit inadequate. Like, oh, well, no, but I just had a hard day. Just listen to me. And it's really hard. So we do have to check ourselves because we don't like to see people we love having a hard time. So yeah, we want to fix it, but actually they don't need us to fix it. And actually it's not really, sometimes it's not helpful for us to fix it. It can just make them feel really isolated. Like if someone tries to fix your problems when you've had a hard day, what you want is someone to go, oh man, that's yucky. I'm sorry. That's really what you want. But yeah, totally, Lani, I get you. It is hard. We have to check ourselves sometimes.
And also remembering too that that's really natural for us, because if we're not the person feeling anxious, we've got access to that thinking brain, so we can automatically go, oh, I can see some solutions here. But for that person who doesn't have access because they're feeling really anxious, yeah, we have to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, totally.
I think also to add to that, listening first and being with, we don't always get, we learn how to be with people based on how our parents were with us too. So sometimes if you were brought up always the way think around the way your parents helped you deal with feelings or problem solving things, often we tend to do the same. We haven't been taught this stuff, so it's really natural. Yeah.
Jodie's asked about anxious headaches, and my suggestion, Jodes, and I'm happy for your thoughts on this as well, Steph, is if that for me would meet the threshold of it being time to intervene. So if you've got a girl who is having headaches from anxiety, so kind of our threshold for treatment is this affecting her functioning at school or at home, or physically? If it's affecting her functioning and she's getting daily headaches, that's time for us to intervene. So we're wanting to get some treatment for Jodie's daughter if she's having ongoing headaches, I would have thought. Steph?
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look at that comment. So do we treat the symptoms? I'd rather not be giving Panadol too regularly. See if you can treat the anxiety first. Like, see if you can use the skills that we've talked about in addressing her anxiety, and if the headaches don't go away, then as Kim said, yeah, definitely like seeking more professional support. I think coming in, if your child's got a headache because she's anxious and you're giving a Panadol as the first line of, as your first sort of solution, it's that problem solving, it's the coming in there, which might not actually be helping the problem per se.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put our email address in the chat there as well, the psychologist's email address. So if anybody has any questions that come up after they watch this, if they watch this later on after the live session, please feel free to email us. That goes to myself, Steph, and our other psychologist, Iko, who's lovely. The Brave program, Danny's just suggested. Yeah, that is a fantastic program. So the Brave program is an online program to help combat anxiety, which I can put the link up for. I will try and find that and put the link up. Other programs, Steph, one that I really love is a DBT program, which is about distress tolerance. So helping kids, and I think it's usually children and their caregiver, to sit with anxiety. So that's opening up in August. So you can have a look. It's called DB Teen. I think it's a free program too. So that's another really good one. And I'm pretty sure that runs in person unless COVID changes that, but they do group work with caregiver and child around distress tolerance.
Yeah, that's in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any programs you can think of, Steph?
It's hard to know because everything's been so disrupted.
Yeah.
In terms of local programs, I can't off the top of my head think of online ones, but I'm sure there are some good programs or resources to go to. So perhaps we can, if you want to email us, we can put together a bit of a list maybe.
And it sort of depends on what the individual is needing as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies. If I have got my microphone off, haven't I? Yes, you can hear me. I think on behalf of everybody who attended, they'd agree that there were some fantastic takeaways from your presentation this evening, Steph, and Kimberly, some great feedback on the chat as well. Hopefully when I stop this session, I'll have a recording that I'll be able to send out to everyone. So if you've missed anything or want to take any notes, then you'll have a copy of it to watch later. So thank you all very, very much. And I hope you thoroughly enjoyed it. I know I learned a lot. Unfortunately, my kids are a bit older now, so they're not going to benefit quite as much. But yeah, it was fantastic. You've done a remarkable job. So thank you, ladies.